It's important to see the linkage between the tasks that people do and the KSAOs needed to be able to do those tasks. So when we do a KSAO task analysis, we have to define what the tasks are. We have to link that then to what is the skill set needed to be able to do that. And that's how we track the process. So we want the individual who is doing the task, the subject matter expert, to document what they do. And so giving them some structure in which to do that is really helpful. So they will sit down and do their list of tasks that they do. You might, as the job analyzer, be the one to observe them at the same time, and then we cross-check your list and their list to really try to get a fuller picture of what it is that the individual does and the tasks the KSAOs needed to be able to do those tasks. So we want it to be as detailed as possible because we need to differentiate between essential functions and peripheral functions. The essential functions are important. Peripheral functions are not as important. They're nice if they can do them, but we don't want to be assessing skill to do peripheral functions. We should be assessing the skills for the most essential functions of the job. So the most important thing here is that the HR department has to look at those lists of tasks and KSAOs and start to really develop them into a system, what we call that the cognitive task analysis, to say, well, if this is the task they're doing, these are the skills that they need to have to be able to do it. This is the knowledge that they need to have to be able to do that. And so the goal is from there to develop what we call actionable items. So action words, settles meetings every day, conducts structured analysis, and engages with coworkers to develop product design. Any number of things. It's action words, very similar to the type of action words that you would put in your resume, right? If you've developed a resume, you were taught that you want it to be action words, verbs that say, this is what I did, this is why I did it, this is when I did it, this is how often I did it. And that gives the reader a very clear picture of exactly what your skill set is. And that has to be matched against what we know is a similar process that we've engaged in developing the job descriptions by looking at those tasks, creating action words that are needed for you to be able to understand what's essential to the job. Then there are observable tasks and observable KSAOs, and there are things that we have to assume based on inference about what is knowledge that somebody needs to have to be able to do a job. So there's stuff that's really direct and easy and it makes sense, and then there are other things that take a little bit more inference. So if they do this, then it means they have this particular skill. So that is something that we also need to get at in doing that cognitive task analysis, is not just looking at the obvious, but also looking at things that are not so directly observable and coming up with some conclusions about what they mean. And as I've already discussed, we need to know what's critical and what's not, what is central and essential to the job and what is peripheral to the job. So we need to do what we call a criticality survey or a critical analysis to know and rate each of the skills so that we can get a sense of how important they are in a ranked method. So the most important, the least important. When you get to the staffing class, Management 431, that is, if you take that class, obviously not all of you will, but those of you that do take it, you will be taught how to do a job analysis, and you will be asked to do a job analysis of a job that either you or someone close to you is familiar with, so you can ask them the questions and start to really get at what are some of the essential functions of that job. ultimately we create a grid of sorts where we have all the tasks aligned and all the KSAs needed for the job, and we map the KSAs to the grids, to the tasks, and so in that grid formation. And the goal is so that we can understand what are the most essential knowledge, skills, and abilities that the individual needs to have to do the most essential functions of the job. Our goal is obviously to get as many people involved in the process to make sure we've got a good cross section of people with different experiences and different perspectives to be able to continue to write these things. Sometimes we put in distractors, right? Things that are kind of fake to see if people are paying attention. Because sometimes people don't. Sometimes people don't take it seriously, and they just go, yeah. These are things I do. Oh, so you milk monkeys on a weekly basis, and it means, that was a distractor in the survey, and people didn't read it, and therefore we know that they probably don't milk monkeys on a weekly basis because nobody's working in a zoo at this present moment. And so the goal is to make sure that the information you're getting is accurate. That's really what it kind of comes down to. There's a lot of different ways we can make sure that happens, and distractors or bogus tasks are ways to make sure people are paying attention. But we want to make sure we've got incentives in place for people to be able to participate and to take it seriously, because they need to understand that if they don't do this, they may get underpaid, undercompensated, and maybe underqualified for advancement and promotional opportunities. So having this is so important for everybody all around. One tool we can use is what we call a critical incidence technique, where the subject matter expert or the job incumbent or the manager describe important situations and critical things that go on in their job. So they have to describe it, they have to talk about when they do it, how often they do it, why they do it, how it relates to other tasks involved in the company, how my output it becomes somebody else's input and somebody else's output becomes my input, however, whatever that flow of work looks like. And so we want to know the good things and the not so good things, because the job description has to fully reflect all aspects of the job. Some of it's good, some of it's not so good. And we want to make sure that we're basically taking it seriously. We want as rich information as possible because it's so valuable for us to be able to write a good, accurate job description, because it only benefits the company and the employee when we have that. We can also do a sort of off-the-shelf questionnaire, which is called a position analysis questionnaire, which has a laundry list of questions that people can ask. It's kind of generic, and the tasks for one job are not going to match the tasks to the other, but they've got the universe of tasks, as many as obviously as possible, loaded in there so that people can pick and choose and decide, no, this is important, this is not important. And you have to do this position questionnaire regularly to make sure we're staying on top of the skills needed. This is a easier tool to use because we don't have to create things. We're not recreating the wheel. There is already a general questionnaire available for people to use that includes a wide scope of KSAOs and tasks for particular positions. And so the advantage of using this position analysis questionnaire is that it's less time consuming and less laborious to do it, but we don't always get the richest of information. So we may start with our position analysis questionnaire, and then we may go back to individuals and ask them to elaborate with qualitative data. Remember, we talked about quantitative versus qualitative, and how important it is to not only have the quantitative information, but the qualitative, the more in-depth opinions and expressions and narratives that are more rich in terms of what they communicate. Another great source, or at least a good starting point, is what we call ONET, the Occupational Information Network. And ONET, you basically go to onet.com, ONET.com, and they have generic job descriptions for a whole host of different job titles. So when we teach you how to do job analysis, we tell you to start with the ONET job description. Look at what's in that job description. That is a fairly common set of skills that someone needs to be able to do that job. And then we break it down from there. We might add things, we might subtract things, but it's a very, very good starting point. And it gives us a fairly broad general understanding of what is involved in the job. And so this way, we may be underutilizing someone with that particular skill set. We may be asking too much of somebody with that particular skill set. And ultimately, the goal is to fine-tune that job description so it fully reflects what they're doing. Competency modeling, is similar to doing job analysis, but really what we're trying to get at is, again, the basic competencies that an individual needs to have to be able to do the job. So that competency modeling is looking at some of the most essential competencies that someone needs to have: critical thinking and conscientious behaviors and a good work ethic. Those sorts of things are general competencies, and these competencies can be transferable across jobs. So as long as we know someone has a strong competency, we can then assess whether or not they are adaptable to be able to do that in another position for the company. The goal is we want to develop people to be broadly adaptable to go into any position in the company.